Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of cool stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about this for a while, and we're not quite ready for all the bells and whistles or have all the final answers, but we've been jamming on what a narrative event could be. We still love running our singles event, which is a great blast. We're trying out 2500 recently, and the coming up RTT, which is exciting, and our doubles was a huge hit. But we're really excited about offering a variety of event types throughout the year, not just one style. In particular, our community has definitely responded with like, yes, please, let's mix it up. This system is great, just right for that. So we've been percolating, Evan in particular, on the side in terms of what this could be and imagining it. And it's not easy, is it? There are so many steps to it. And I think the biggest thing we've talked about it before, it's not like, hey, I'm going to go open the match play guidebook and it's going to say how to run a narrative RTT, a one-day event, or how to run a narrative two-day event, or looking at other game systems. There have been definitely different communities and groups that have run narrative events, over the years in different game systems, but there's really not a standard, is there? And I think that was part of the challenging point is we need to find a system that we were excited about, that we felt the local community would be pumped to play, but also something that we could run more than once, right? Because this is a lot of effort, in many ways, more effort than a normal event, isn't it?
Yeah, and just to be clear about what we even mean when we say narrative event. So first of all, most people when they're thinking about narrative, at the very least, are often thinking about like a slow grow campaign where maybe you're starting a new
Mm.
army, you start with 500 points, play against some other people, and usually you add to the army as you go. And that tends to
Hmm.
leave you with something that's relatively more of a narrative focus because it's like, okay, well, we won that battle, now we're going to add some units to it, whatever. Similar to also like Warhammer 40k Crusade rules that were out in years past was a similar kind of concept where over several weeks or months you could play with strangers, you could play with friends, and something or some little things here and there would change about your army as you basically grew through the previous games. What we're
Hmm.
talking about is actually having like a 1 day or 2 day events where a lot of strangers all show up at the same place with a bunch of tables, and we just want them to
Hmm.
have interesting and connected games to play with each other. Where it's not about which one individual player it went undefeated. It's more about
Yeah.
what is the sum total of all the games that happened that day, and are there ways that we can make those individual games more interesting, and in ways that are not
Yeah.
necessarily, hey, who's the best general, who's got the best list.
Yeah, and so as a starting point here, as Evan said, there's nothing wrong with the other, whether it's a league, whether it's, a conquest campaign. There are many different forms that narrative event take. And basically, narrative, as Evan's pointing out, it's really a broad term. And it really doesn't have one definition. Like if you say
Yeah.
I'm going to a one-day RTT and it's 2,000 points, that's pretty standardized within certainly the Games Workshop competitive community. Whether it's 40k, whether it's Old World, whether it's AOS, it's pretty clear exactly what you're going to get out of that, right? With some interesting variation that the TO might be running for scenarios or missions at that event, but pretty standardized. And the two-day GT is pretty much the same thing. And similar to how where we ran our doubles event, right? That is really more of a variation of that typical standardization of that typical RTT or GT template. So again, it's definitely was meaningfully different because it was having two players on the team, but it was still very similar. But narrative is just this term that people use for anything that isn't just following those core match play guide
Yeah.
rules, right? Or basically what's out of the book gets the label or wrapper of narrative, and that's basically what's happening. That now for us, a big thing. We have an escalation league, we have normal leagues, we have things that go on over a period of time. We've run online events, and we still do. We have one coming up that goes over several weeks, 5 weeks to go through that, play one game a week. But we know that the majority of our community based are really not about those pickup games. They really engage meaningfully, and I show up for this day. I've booked this off. I've talked to my friend, my
My wife,
roommate,
my
my wife,
kids.
my significant others. I've got a babysitter for the kids. I'm gonna have a fun, awesome day, or better yet, weekend with some friends who love this game, who love this community, and want to have just a great time rolling dice with me. So that's really what was our starting point. Not that those other versions aren't great; they are, but we also know. It's hard to keep people's momentum. I know in the past many times with a narrative league or conquest or campaign that goes over many weeks or several months, you get a pretty high success rate of people showing up for a 1 or 2 day event. So that's really why that's our starting point for the conversation.
Yeah, and also it gives something players something to look forward to, or to paint their army up to match a certain event that's coming up.
Hmm.
Similarly, with a narrative event, there seems to be a much greater acceptance, if not an expectation, that there should be some kind of limitations on the armies that show up, because it is not simply about playing the best army list that can beat everyone else. Uh, and that those are things that then can lead people to be inspired to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to go pick up a new box of orc boys, and I'm actually going to paint them because they're going to show up on the table because there's a reason to bring them, right? And the reason is
Hmm.
that I've got a theme I'm going for, and I'm really excited to have these guys show up, and we'll see how many heads I can bash with them. And that's not necessarily what the competitive, I'm just going to win at all costs mindset leads people to do. So it's having an
Hmm.
alternative to that, where it's still a community coming together to play interesting games with each other without it simply being about who can win the most. And especially when the game has, at least to some degree, a foregone conclusion as to who can win the most, maybe this is more interesting for a lot of people. And we're definitely hoping that that's going to be the case when we release our event.
Yeah, so let's dive in. So we're not going to go through it in excruciating detail because that would probably take several hours. But we do want to take you through kind of our iteration process and show you what are some of the ideas that we're currently discussing, some of the kind of where our mindset is, what are the pros and cons we see with these concepts, and maybe this might inspire some other communities out there as well. Or if you already have a great community running some narrative events, we'd love to hear some of your ideas. But so let's start at the beginning of the doc and let's go through it and let's just see where we end up. I'd love to share with people what we're thinking. So teams, Evan, why did we start with teams?
So I think the idea of teams came to me because I wanted to have a reason for people to, for one thing, to bring specific armies, but also to have it be more about a collaborative score that a group of players get, as opposed to an individual getting 5 wins and no losses, right? This is
Hmm.
about a team. Let's say for example, like the quote unquote good guys versus the bad guys. Which team ends up with a higher score by the end of the weekend, especially if it's a 2-day event? And
Hmm.
so that's where the team idea. So this is not a WTC style team where you're trying to put two
No.
defenders forwards and try to pick the skew that matches the other. In fact, as soon as we reach the army list restrictions, you're going to see that no WTC list would be legal under these rules, because I don't think that is exactly the kind of narrative Warhammer that most people want to see. So
Yeah.
these teams are a loose group of individuals who don't necessarily need to be friends or need to have pre-planned in advance what they're going to do, but it's
Hmm.
I'm playing High Elves. I'm going to team up with the Cathay, with the Empire, right, and the Dwarves, and we're on one side, quote unquote, like the good guys in this scenario, and then the Forces of Chaos and the Beastmen and the Skaven are kind of on the other side. So this will the teams, or at least the guidelines for the teams, will be broken up based on the individual campaign or event of that day. The first event that
Hmm.
we are interested in doing is basically a focus around the war in the Westerlands, which is the region of Marienburg in the Empire, which is being attacked by Friedel the Chainmaker. And during one of the more recent Arcane Journals, the Jade Fleet of
Hmm.
Cathay has shown up to fight back. So we have kind of a clear, here are the main characters, kind of on both sides of this conflict. And that leads to a certain set of alliances, whether they're kind of shaky alliances or not, that will be either pro or against the chaos. But
Yeah. So
yeah,
let's
go for
so
it.
start before we go too much further.
Yeah,
Let's dive into what are the benefits in terms of why did we go with teams versus individuals? Now, whether it's a 1 day and we have, let's say, 18, 20 players at a local gaming store, right, which is pretty normal, or whether it's a 2 day, which we're hoping to run one of these next year and we get 40, 50 people, right? Either way, we are intending, at least out of the gate, to do the games are 1 versus 1 per normal. So that is still using the normal format, but right, we want to tell a story, right, a narrative that everybody's involved in this, right? And we don't want to tell 20 individual stories. We
yeah,
want to tell one overarching story that everyone is playing together with. And there are some good examples of this. And honestly, I think some of the GW 40K narrative events that they've run have some really cool ideas and what they've done, really inspiring stuff. So this is where, again, the simplest form you could say, half the room is on the good guy team, half the room is on the bad guy team. So red team versus blue team. And you're telling a story and you have different objectives. Now, does it technically need to be good guys and bad guys? No. As Evan said, relative to the story or narrative you're crafting, you
yeah.
could mix and match this however you want. And we'll get into it a little bit more. But that's the reason why we want half of the room, you're fighting for something to happen, right? And
Yeah.
for an overall objective to happen. And so even if you're and it also means if you lose your one battle or you don't complete your one objective, all is not lost, right?
Yeah.
You're really trying to tell the story, and in fact, even if you do lose, that's part of the story, right?
Well,
Because really, what you're trying to do is tell an awesome story that you and your friends make over the duration of this event.
Right. Like, for example, I put this in the primer here. The purpose of the event is not to win. The purpose is to have fun and tell stories as a community. Oftentimes, a valiant defeat is a more memorable story than a resounding victory. So just so people understand this, so there could be a campaign where after, let's say, the good guys win in the Westerlands, perhaps a rivalry forms between the High Elves and Cathay, and the next event could be High Elves on one side, Cathay on the other, and all the factions have kind of started lining up. So that's just an example how it's not always just good guys versus bad guys. Now, what else is there? We don't want to say that there's a certain number of slots on the day for each team, and then potentially make people not want to show up. So there's a third team. The Pirates and Raiders are essentially the neutral or unaligned players. Now, for example, like the TO, who are going to be filling in to help fill in the gaps of any other number of people, especially if someone had to leave early, that kind of thing. Because if Team 1 had 10 players, Team 2 had 7 players, we don't want 3 players to be sitting out, right? If Team 1's playing against Team 2. So that's where this kind of third party comes in, and they fill in to play against the unaligned players. So this all happens in the pairings. The way the pairings work is that there's like set scenarios where certain people are defending certain regions of the map, certain regions of the table. This works great for Old World Legends community specifically because Mike has gone through the trouble of making, 10 or 11 tables of very custom, unique terrain of different themes?
Working on table 14 right now.
14. Okay, so there's 13 already, and each of them have a different theme and vibe. Many of them are so unique that they may not fit into the Western Empire or whatever, but we don't need all of them. And so every table will represent a certain region of the map that is being either attacked by Team 1 or defended by Team 2, vice versa. So the defenders of each team will go out and pick the table they want to defend. So in other words, they're picking the scenario, right? And then the attackers are essentially picking your opponent. So you're picking, okay, I want to go play against the dwarves, I want to go play against the elves, that kind of thing. And this gives you a good narrative vibe of, hey, if your army has hatred undead, or if your army has special rules when they interact against a certain opponent, maybe you could try to hold out and see if you could play against that particular enemy. Or maybe you have a friend who you want to play against, and this gives you that ability to help make those pairings happen.
So before we get into the pairings, as Evan said, there's 2 primary reasons why we're structuring it this way. One is that a lot of players do just have one army, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to craft a story, and it's hard to craft a story that makes 17 factions all across the old world being main players in that story, right? So it means effectively this is the purpose of the mercenary category, because you know what, if someone's rocking lizardmen and the campaign isn't focused on lizardmen, we want to make sure that they're hunting some treasure down into the mercenary force, and we'll get them in onto one side. So the other part of that, so we want to make sure that players can still bring the army they want to bring. We don't want to create gates or reasons to not show up. We want everybody to show up and have a great time. The other reason is, as Evan said, we don't know, right? No matter what we do, it's not going to be even, right? So we have to plan from the beginning that it's not going to be even number of players. So we need to basically make a scoring system. While it's not about crushing your opponents, one side of the room is competing with the other side of the room to get the most, faction
overall
team
score.
points. Overall score for the end of the day. So because we're still playing a competitive game, but it is a much more casual environment and narrative, but you're still trying to complete objectives. So those are the 2 reasons why we feel this is important, because doing it, because even if you got it all even and perfect, right, and you're like, yes, it's all lined up, and I talked to all the players and I prepped them all and I did all this and that, and guess what, the day of someone's sick, or someone shows up late, or their wife said, sorry, you can't go, or life happens. You have to be flexible in your system, in particular when you're running an event. So that's why it's structured this way.
Yeah, and then so the overall, what happens is that with whatever team needs additional enemies to play against, so there's defenders that have not been attacked yet, then the Pirates and Raiders can fill in and attack those players, and they will contribute whatever score they earn to the team that they're, essentially the team, the opposite team of the one they're playing against. Now, obviously, this means that the Pirates don't necessarily win overall because they're not, combining their scores together. And instead, the highest scoring player overall, and we're going to count basically battle points from the games, your painting score, and your swordsman score kind of combined. And that player will be called the Pirate King, which, to be honest, is what I want to win. That sounds fun.
Well, we'll talk about the trophies and prizes later. But so ultimately, there are three basically categories of prizes. There's actually several categories of prizes that we are planning for. Again, 1 day versus 2 day. 2 days can have more prizes and such. But effectively, the mercenaries roll up into one side or the other side, and doing our best to get the teams as even as we can get them.
All right. So up next is it's been workshopped here. Basically, the scenarios you can get victory points for winning your game. And this will be mostly based on the actual objective on the table. So if you have certain, baggage trains to capture or central objective to hold, that's where you get that victory point. A draw would be like, for example, if it's who holds the objective for more turns in the game, and you both hold it for 3 turns, then it's a tie, and then you each get 1 point for that. And then there's also additional points for getting kill points of the enemy army. And this is not number of victory points more than the enemy. So both players can score the victory points, basically the slaughter bonus. And this gives you a better individual score for earning best teammate. And so it's more encouraging, this idea that you should engage with the opponent and be able to not only get points, but also it's not too bad if you lose points. And you don't always have to go and run and hide your last little skirmisher guy who rallied on the last turn of the game behind a hill. Instead, you can go get in the fight because it's more fun that way.
Yeah, so let's break these down in terms of some of our conversation, because there's some really interesting points here. So the first one, starting with the victory, it's really objective. And the idea is that all of these scenarios, whether you're the attacker or defender, you will have a likely, depending on the table or in the board you're on and which phase of the event you're in, will have a different objective. And it is possible that you both fail the objective. It is also possible that you both complete the objective, and that's okay. We are intentionally doing that, right? My objective might be I need to defend these baggage trains, and no matter what, don't let either of them be destroyed. If they both survive, I get 2 points. If only one survives, I get 1 point. While Evan's objective in this scenario might be burning a building down, right? Or something complete, or escorting a unit, a special character off the table. So we intentionally want asynchronous, not symmetrical objectives. So that is intentional, and it is both of you can achieve them, which is great. And the other one, as you said, the victory points, it is specifically not a delta. Normally when you're playing the game for kill points, it's all right, I killed this many points, Evan, you killed this many points, what's the difference, the delta of our score? Cool, that's truly how much somebody won or lost by. We're not doing that on purpose, because the primary reason to have this is to promote engagement. We are here to have fun. We're not here for you to preserve points or to run away. The best stories or the best games is when as many models on the table die as possible. So there's actually no penalty for the victory point added bonus score for your army getting wiped out. If you complete your objective, and as long as you kill 1,000 points of the enemy's army, boom, you score that. And again, your opponent could score that too. Because I could tell you for a fact, having run so many Old World events, almost always the best games in Old World always is when pretty much both opponents' armies are almost completely wiped out
and
at the end of the game. Those are great games.
Those games end up being an 11-9, which is the same score you would get if one person stands next to their Hearthstone the entire game and the other person sits in the back of the board. So it's like this incentivizes you as individually, if you want to get the best score, to go out there and earn it by interacting with the opponent, not just by trying to preserve your own army. And that might incentivize you to not take a Death Star and instead take, more multiple, smaller, fast units or skirmishers or ambushers, things that can actually get across the table, get into the enemy lines. And even if they usually kill the same number of points that they give up, that's a win for you, if that makes sense. So if you have a 100 or 120 point ambushing unit that often dies, but will often also kill a cannon on the way in there, great. That's exactly what you want. That is better for you than not taking it at all.
Yep. So you already have the incentive. Hey, if I have more of my army left alive, I will be able to kill more things with it. We don't need to give you more incentive than that. Yep. So instead, it's just go engage, fight the enemy army, and you will score additional points. So love it.
Okay, I've got a whole bunch of nonsense in here about how I want to try to incorporate the ongoing rivalry in amongst an individual team. So if the team, for example, has the good guys versus the bad guys, and it's like all of the Empire players are on the good guy team, that doesn't mean we're forgetting about the idea that there is an Empire Civil War going on. And if somebody wants to say that their Empire force is fighting for Magritte the Sixth specifically, or if you're fighting for Sigismund and the northern regions, then you get to kind of contribute to the overall fate of those internecine rivalries and potentially lead to more events in the future. So you get to have those kind of more like individual matchups. And on the evil guys team, for example, you can say that your Chaos Army is, for example, dedicated to Nurgle, and someone else might be dedicated to Tzeentch, and then your individual scores might lead to a rivalry of, looks like the Nurgle players are really pulling ahead, that kind of thing.
I think the big idea there for people, and again, we do not have all the nuances ironed out here, but the big idea that everyone was rocking here is, for those of you who remember, like the the old, Summer of Chaos campaign, right? Or things like
Storm of
that. So
Chaos.
the
Yeah,
goal
this is a
here
lot
is
like Storm of Chaos, but all in one day, if that makes sense.
exactly. And GW's done a bunch of those. So, but our idea is how do we make it so, and again, we won't just be running as we started this, just narrative events going forward. This will be one of the type of events, but we do believe this will be very successful. We've had a lot of players expressed a ton of excitement and interest in this. And so we will likely run more than one a year. So will likely be a series of them throughout the year, TBD how many and how often we run them. But you can imagine, if we imagine 2026 is the campaign of, the Northern Waste invasion or whatever, right? So the idea is that the events we run are telling a narrative, not just for that event, but the outcome of that. We're creating our own community narrative and lore that we will write up, that we will craft, and we'll put up on the website for everyone to enjoy. And this will evolve throughout this campaign throughout the year. So it's almost that similar to what GW is doing on a much larger scale, though I kind of question if they had predetermined outcomes. But that's a different conversation for another day.
Yeah.
We're letting the community craft the fate and outcome of this narrative in the Old World Legends community through attending the events, which is really exciting. So that's the big idea Evan has, is not just the story that we're telling that day, but hey, it's not just one and done. This will build onto the next event that will run during the year.
Right, and it's kind of like establishing an Old World Legends canon of, okay, if the good guys win the first game, but all of our, essentially High Elf or Empire players are really chagrined with the Cathayan players, then perhaps that leads to a, you know what, I don't know if I really like you landing on my shores and invading my lands, Mr. Cathay. And then that's the next event. So bringing, named special characters is also, or if you just name your characters that you're creating, that's a great way to give me more kind of narrative feedback that can then drive the story forward as we move forward. So there will be extra kind of bonus thematic value points in terms of how influential individual players can be on the story.
It should be a lot of fun.
Okay, this is probably what a lot of people are going to talk the most about. So if you're going to have a narrative event, 70 to 85% of the people who we surveyed said there has to be some level of guidelines and comp, that you can't just have, okay, it's a narrative event, but also just kill each other and kick their face in.
Now, to be clear, this is our surveys from our communities. Every community out there, you should survey your own community. You should ask your own player base, because and again, we're big believers in one size doesn't fit all in Old World, and we love this rule set because different communities around the world can play it in so many different ways, and that's amazing. So for us, this is us taking a sample size of a couple hundred people from our community and what they're telling us, the people who are attending our event, and what they wanted. And they said, hey, we're very interested in attending a narrative event. We would like some guidelines, which will probably go from guidelines into, again, we're debating how required or not required these are going to be. But these are some of the main ideas that Evan's been cooking up and that we've been discussing back and forth.
Yeah, and I've discussed these with many people. So I play 8 of the 17 available armies, and I have a good experience playing against the rest. I've considered essentially what this does to list building for all of them, and so that there shouldn't be any thematic limitations. The primary one that I have a really hard time working around is the Troll Horde, where you want to take Troll Hags and still have some Giants or something. It's really hard to figure out exactly how you can maybe make that not super limited. But essentially, let's just go through it, because then a lot of people are listening.
Well, before we dive into it, let's even start with the premise. So some people have the opinion of, hey, just provide some guidelines and people will show up with super fun thematic lists. And that is true to a degree. The problem is, what I believe in my head is a fun thematic list is going to be different what Evan has in his head as a fun, which will be very different in someone else's head who has a fun thematic list. And also, we're still gamers at the end of the day. We still want to compete, even in a casual environment. So, which is why we are much more leaning towards, it started as guidelines. We are going to try, right? That, as we do with all events, we try stuff out on one day RTTs, collect more feedback, refine it a few times before we run a 2-day event. So this is our starting point. We are likely going to shift these from guidelines to, nope, these are the comp restriction rules for a narrative event. We believe this will lead to a much more fun experience. Please craft whatever list you want to craft, fun thematic list within this comp rule set. So that is our theory. Feel free to toss out any other ideas you might have out there in your communities. Again, we're basing this off of what we see in our communities. There might be some things we're totally missing that should be addressed, or perhaps should be, but we just haven't seen them in our community. So please let us know in the comments things that you're seeing or thoughts that you might have. But let's walk you through the ideas that we have.
And this is all following on the previous video we made about engagement. So, in my mind, the most important part of a narrative battle is that it's supposed to be engaging between both players. You're not supposed to be taking a skew list that is points denial, all gun line, all flying, all ethereal, anything of that nature. So, every single concept that a WTC team, that's the world team champions type lists where they're trying to skew into, okay, this list's really good against Cathay, this list's really good at not giving any points over. Complete opposite. And there are, I think, 4 areas of the game that you can overindulge in that makes it an uninteresting game for someone who's taking a more balanced list. Now, if the game was a little bit differently designed, perhaps a very balanced army would just beat any kind of skew list. However, I've never played a Games Workshop game that works that way. It's always...
Yeah, we're not going for balance. That's a good point there. We're not going for this is going to balance the game.
Right.
We're trying to flip the script from normally a lot of players will bring the win at all costs list. Instead, we're trying to flip the script on narrative events. It should be fun at all costs.
Yeah, sure.
Right? We want to encourage players to bring a fun list that no matter who you're playing against, you're going to have a great time. They're going to have a great time. And we believe that is mostly about promoting engaging lists that are more a combined arms approach, where you and your opponent will have really interesting choices. And it's mostly, as Evan said, reducing the skew. We're bringing in the skews so that you can't go super hard into one area, because we believe almost any skew in the game, whether it's skew monster mash, skew magic missiles, skew powerful characters, skew whatever, shooting, that's when we believe the engagement and fun will often plummet for your opponent if they didn't bring a list that's prepared to fight.
For the majority of people, essentially.
Not everybody.
Not everybody. Okay, so let's go through it. First of all, and I think this should be maybe the whole thing in bold, your army is not a highly optimized net list and does not abuse the spirit of the restrictions. That is something that's obviously subjective, but hopefully gives people an idea of what we're trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is a maximum of 40% of your points in total spent on characters. I know that people go back and forth on this a lot. This is not the only limitation on the character type units. You'll see a few more later. So again, what I don't want to say is that you limit it to 25%, and then the only unit or the only character you ever see in a game is a prince on a dragon, for example, because you'll never take any of the other guys. So 40% gives you some limitations without making it too harsh, and we'll circle back on that to see how it goes.
And we've been going back and forth. Is 25%? Is 30%? Is 40%? Yeah. Right? That's a tough decision, and what we've been doing is going through our conversation of, all right, what are the different armies we think that will show up, and what does this look like? But as Evan said, this is not the only restriction on characters, because, for instance, there are comp guidelines here for flyers and other things, and typically there are often characters on a big flying mount. So let's go through all of them. And again, these are kind of our initial thoughts, right? This is going to be an evolving process.
And some of these kind of lean into on each other, and they exist in tandem with each other. So I'm just going to circle back to all of the basically things you're not allowed to do before we add the things that you do get to take in addition. You can't take the Ruby Ring or the Ogre Blade. Now, we haven't gotten here yet, but in the games, you are going to be able to earn common magic items drawing from a deck. And Mike, you suggested the idea that basically if you do well, or if your team is winning, you get to draw from perhaps like the higher points value items or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But,
so from round to round, you'll get magic items.
I prefer the idea for narrative and thematic lists for them to not include these 2 items, because I think that the Ogre Blade kind of, even though it isn't more than enough to take with a Talisman Protection now, it's still an item that's a bit better than most other magic weapons in the game, and I would love it if people took Sword of the Quest, or the Chaos Rune Sword, or the Rune Fang, and took those instead, and have that be a good starting point. And the Ruby Ring is the same thing, but not for, big monsters, characters, and all that stuff. It's more for, so I brought these Illyrian Reavers, and you brought a Ruby Ring, so I guess my Reavers are dead now. And that's something that we don't need to have in every single game. So if you get the item by drawing it from the cards, that'd be great. But maybe not just bring it with you.
Yeah, so it doesn't mean these are off the table. It just means you're not starting with it. You have the potential to randomly earn one of these between rounds.
Yeah. Okay, so you can't spend more than 40% of your items on units and characters that have the Fly special rule. So this includes things like, Skycutter Chariots, which are only like 90 points. So if it's 40%, if it's a 2,000 point game, that's, you have 800 points to spend. But it does add up. And some armies really like to take 1,500 points of things that fly and just jump over you. And if, in particular, having a very high fly skew really hurts if the other player actually brought some melee infantry that walk around on foot in a not skirmishing unit. It really hurts those kinds of builds. And so if you want to see those on the table, you have to limit how much fly exists, I think.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yep.
right. The next one is characters and units cannot purchase multiple stacking upgrades, such as more than two quote unquote saves that are 5+ or better. For example, having a 3+ armor, 5+ ward, 5+ regen, combined with mounts that also provide additional wounds. So it's not, you can have, the Chaos Lord on a demonic mount or on a horse. That's not a lot of additional wounds with a 3+ armor save and have the Crown of Commandment. Because, for example, if you said you just couldn't have 3 saves in general, then you could never have the regen items on the chaos characters at all because they always have the ward, right? So it's just when you buy it also at the dragon or also the manticore. So when you have that many
Mm-hmm.
wounds. The next one is more than one item or upgrade that gives the unit or the character -1 to be hit. So if you have multiple -1s to hit, that's too many, and it will lead to people being like, okay, then I guess I need the ogre blade to be able to hurt you because if I get one through, I want it to do a lot, something like that.
Yeah, and there's a couple ways we've been again discussing how to approach this. For instance, this could also be reworded as: at no point in time during the game can you ever
Right.
have more than -1 to hit. So you could still take multiple sources of it, but you could never. It would never stack. So again, we're still discussing what's the better version of
Yeah,
this,
it
right?
depends because what we're really talking about is the army list building strategy of putting, okay, I'm going to have Bedazzling Helm on my Tomb King, and I'm also going to get Light of Protection, so that's -2 to hit. I'm going
Yeah,
to try to
it's the
stack those.
stacking that
Yeah.
becomes a problem.
Or I'm going to have a Doom Bull with Slugskin and Bedazzling Helm, so I got -2 to hit at all times. These are the things that are too unengaging for a narrative event to have. Now, whether or not we, like you were just saying, errata the rules, so our narrative errata adds these things in there, or if we have it at the army list building step, it should be in one of those two places.
Yeah, TBD, right?
Then,
But what is stacking? It's effectively another form of skew.
yes,
Is what it is.
exactly. Well, these are defense skews. So this is I'm so survivable. Good luck ever, being able to hurt me. Okay, more than one mount, upgrade, or item that improves the cast or dispel rolls. So this is, for example, Mortis Engine, and let's just say if the Vampire Counts had a +1 to cast item, like being able to get 2 of those things on the same guy. The same idea takes place with essentially like Wild Herd. They get a lot of bonuses to cast. So now this again might be another place where, hey, wouldn't it be great maybe if we just use an errata instead of the army list builder? But this is a guideline for your army list construction to not try to do this. Basically asking players, please don't try to make this happen.
Yeah, well, these are our notes. Obviously,
Yes.
we're not in player packet form. We're still working on these,
Yes.
but we're really excited by some of these ideas and wanted to share them with the community while we're working on it live.
Yeah. And get feedback. If you're interested in these ideas, if you like them,
Let
if
us
you don't
know.
like them, or if you think we're missing something, please comment and tell us more about that. And we're basically trying to drive engagement. You can also join the Discord and talk in there, where it's a little bit faster to get it back and forth going. All right. And then finally, your army doesn't have more than 2 of any of the following like individual categories. The first category is stone throwers and cannons. So no having 2 Doom Diver, 2 Rock Lobber, that's too many, especially with some of the other limitations. No more than 2 instances of the same spell. So you can't have 5 guys that all cast Vile Tide. You know what you're doing if you're trying to do that. You can pick different spells if you want, but not all the same spell. Same thing for
and you can still have 2 of them. You just can't have more than 2.
Yeah, you can have 2, which is plenty, but 5 is too many. And the same thing goes for Ring of Jet. So this instance of the same spell, including bound spells. This also kind of solves the whole, you have Jade Sentinels or you have Sisters of the Thorn, and they all pick the same spell. Obviously, they nerf Sisters of the Thorn, but we're just talking about picking the same spell and spamming it never feels good, I don't think.
It's another skew.
Yes. Then you can't have more than 2 behemoths or heavy chariots that also have 6 or more wounds. So this does not include like the Mangroswig, who's got like 4 wounds, or the War Sphinx, who has 5. But it does include the Necrosphinx, the Cathayan Sentinel, the Sky Lantern. These behemoths and heavy chariots are often very durable when they have 6 or more wounds. And so if you have 3 or 4 of these things, which a lot of competitive lists have, it becomes your whole list is very, very high toughness, and you're doing a toughness skew where if I have a bunch of Strength 3 archers or Strength 3 spearmen, they're basically pointless in that game. And it makes anything Strength 3 in the game kind of feel like it shouldn't have shown up to work that day. Okay, and then finally, you can't have more than 2 ethereal units with the ethereal special rule. So that's the final one, which is basically skewing against having non-magical attacks. Especially with character limitations or points spent on magic items being potentially limited. If you have a bunch of ethereal things, all of a sudden you're just immune to everything.
Yeah, so obviously this is our work in progress on some of the guidelines or comp that we think would make the narrative event we are planning more engaging, more fun for the players that are showing up. We would not use these at a normal doubles event or our normal singles event. We use basically the GW match play guide rules pretty exclusively for those events. But again, for our narrative event, we're trying to create a different atmosphere, different culture, right? We're really trying to be telling these great stories and have these other armies. And a lot of our players are actually excited. They're like, hey, yeah, I can't take my SKU list I would normally take to a singles event, but suddenly they're like, oh, I could field those units I wanted to field for the last year, but I could never fit them into my list because it wasn't competitive.
Yes.
Suddenly, so there's actually a lot of positive energy the other way around, right? And the cool thing is, guess what? In the same calendar year, there's plenty of room for narrative events and normal
Yeah.
singles events, right? These are not mutually exclusive
Well,
concepts.
Mike, you're this wild person who runs one event a month. I don't think anyone else
Yeah,
in the scene that I've seen runs as many other than Rob from Square Based, who
I
runs
think Rob
tons.
does.
Yeah,
Rob's a machine too. Yeah.
yeah, but you are in the absolute, very narrow tier. And most people who are TOs run, like, let's say LVO, they're running that twice a year. That's a lot
I
of. I
think
mean,
that
it's a
was a
lot of
one off
work.
twice a year. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a one-off. But it's just to give an example of how a lot of TOs, it's like, great. So every summer, I'm really excited for this. I'm going to run one event, and they're probably going to make that one event a competitive event. But for you and for us in our community, we want to mix things up. And so this may be a very popular format. It may not be. We'll find out. Doubles is very popular.
Well, it
Before
was
we,
super popular.
yeah,
We'll find
before
out.
we jump into anything else, so yes, those were some limitations. And to some people, they sound like, oh no, I can't take my one good thing. I know. You can tell me all the examples of things that maybe you wish you could take but you couldn't. I think there should be a policy that, hey, if you've got a highly thematic and narrative list that you want to bring that violates some of these rules, submit it to us and we'll think about it and get back to you. But also, at these events, there should be mercenary units that are going to be extra for each team based on the campaign. So if the campaign is taking place in the Westerlands, essentially what Jade Fleet gave to Cathay, where you have the couple of different units of Empire units to bring as mercenaries, I think that makes sense. So if you have High Elves, or if you're playing as an Empire force, or you're playing as a Bretonnian force, you can bring certain Empire units on your side. And that doesn't make sense for the other team. So for the other team, it would be things like playing certain demons of chaos. So if you are, bringing a Chaos Lord who's Mark of Corn, perhaps you could bring Bloodletters as a mercenary choice. So certain
Yeah.
kind of thematic lists that at least, especially because they're a legacy army, we can't really see on the table right now, and there's not really any reason for that. It definitely feels right to see it. I've played against this before, and there's no reason why every single unit in your army has to be unbreakable and unstable. You can have a mix. it's totally fine.
Yeah. And so we're working on this, but
Yes.
the spirit behind this that Evan started with was, hey, Mike, I'd love to, if I'm playing a Warriors of Chaos army and I was corn themed, to bring some, corn demons with that army. Wouldn't that be cool? Let's ally them in. I'm like, well, that is a cool idea, but that's also really limited. Let's think about the whole event. Let's think about all the players showing up to the event. So why don't we, instead of doing, because that was a very specific thing, and it's not a bad idea, it's a great idea, but like, let's come up with mercenary units, because it's just so much easier to do mercenaries versus allies for so many reasons.
Yes.
So let's come up with some mercenary units that, here's for this event and this story, for this event that we're telling, here's one or two entries that the good guys can take if they want, mercenaries, or here's some ones on the other side that they could take if they're on the bad guys side, which is really, really exciting. So again, this might be a reason to borrow a unit from a friend or to try something else that you might not in, but also very intentionally treating them as mercenaries, so they're very contained. So it's very controlled what is being offered, and it's
Yeah.
specific, it's thematic to this event. So the idea is, whatever our next event would be, might be two totally different mercenary units, and so it might not be the same mercenary units at all. So that's an
Yeah.
idea we're really excited about.
Yeah, and so if a battle's taking place in Ulthuan, then the mercenaries might be more like High Elves on one side and Dark Elves on the other, something like that. Or
Mm-hmm.
in the Border Princes, I would love if we're doing a game in the Border Princes for the Renegade Crowns units to basically be like, yeah, those are just mercenaries you can bring. And so the other thing is that different armies of infamy and different factions have different percentages of mercenaries they're allowed to take. Most grand armies have 20% as their limit, but some armies of infamy go up to like 33%. So like the Renegade Crowns, it's something like 30 or 40. So if you bring Renegade Crowns to this event, you'll have a higher list of mercenaries to pull from and have potentially a very interesting and colorful list to see on the table.
Yeah, but it's also very controlled versus allies, which it's very easy to break the game with allied units, which is why most events don't allow them. But with mercenaries, it's very controlled.
Yes.
So like, yeah, this seems like a really fun, and we want like if we're going to go to the effort to do this, let's do something that everybody who's participating in the event can participate with this if they want to. They can also choose not to, and that's fine too.
Okay. I mean, I think a perfect example of this in the Games Workshop printed rules, essentially the Jade Fleet being able to bring Empire mercenaries. That's basically just an army of infamy that says, "Hey, there's a campaign going on in in the Westerlands in the Empire. Cathay has shown up. Guess what? They're a really elite force. They showed up on a bunch of boats. So guess what? They're going to have to recruit some mercenaries to fight with them. And hey, maybe there's some dispute in the ranks. Maybe they have to roll in the misbehaving mercenaries table. I don't know, but that will be something that can happen, and that's a fun
It's cool.
narrative thing to do. The next thing that we also want to provide as an option is that the armies you take can include units from the Old World Legends Legacy Supplement, which is something that we're working on to help kind of fill in some of the gaps in the army lists that were either deliberately or unintentionally kind of limited.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just going through the Old World Legacy Supplement, the only units we've really talked about in there right now is the Kadai Destroyer. I'm currently workshopping a few more. I know there's one player who would love to bring the Dread Saurian. It had some really interesting 8th edition rules that feel pretty similar to like a Bone Grinder Giant level. Like it's still toughness 6 and it has like 8 wounds, but it doesn't have a ward save. So if you just get a Monster Slayer hit, it just dies. But it is like this freaking like it's huge. Like I don't even know if it's just on a normal size base.
And there are more, and let's not make this because we'll do a whole separate episode to talk about the new ideas. But effectively, right, these are specifically narrative themed rules where we're providing the player base like here are some rules for units that no longer are in the current rule set that we don't let players take to our normal singles or doubles competitive events. But hey, the narrative event is the perfect event to try these things out, to just have fun, just putting it on the table for this weekend, right? So those are some examples. I know, Evan, we've talked about, for instance, the Vermin Lord, right, as another one. And there's some other cool things we're talking about as well. So once we have more baked out, we'll be sure to keep updating the document. It's live right now with the Kadai Destroyer that we this was worked on some months back. And we're going to just keep adding to this over time as we try to resurrect or bring back or allow players to just put those awesome models from the past and their collections back on the table.
One other thing to bring up here is that, at least at the moment, my plan is that our narrative events would not be on BCP or affect anyone's kind of like online win-loss record, because that's not really
it's just a fun weekend.
Yeah, and we'll get to the prizes, because the prizes are pretty incentivizing certain kind of play as well. So when we get there, you'll see that as well. Next thing, and Mike, you made this clear to me, that people really want some kind of a progressive value. So there was a progressive reward system in the Crusade rules of Warhammer 40k that was very extensive and perhaps maybe too complicated, especially for a single day event. But I came up with an idea that I think is relatively easy to try out and go for. Now, the main one, and so basically at each mission you have, will have a progressive reward after you're done playing it. And if you did really well, you get perhaps maybe a slightly better prize or whatever. But it's themed. And so certain missions we'll be able to earn a magic armor, and you'll draw from the common magic armor pool. Or some missions you'll be able to get a magic weapon. You'll draw from the common magic weapon pool. Or in some missions, perhaps we are fighting in Khemri and the Tomb Kings. So you might actually pool from the common and the Tomb Kings items, and maybe you pick up the Destroyer of Eternities, and you get to wield that thing around. And so that's an example of how the specific narrative event might actually fuel or draw interest to the individual games.
Yeah. So as you're going from game to game, there's the incentive to complete your objective and to get some kill points, so that you are contributing those scores to your overall team's score tally for this round, because that will affect what happens in the next round, both not in the story. How do we, are the good guys winning after round one or the bad guys winning? Okay, this is how the story has progressed forward. Here's how it's branched relative to what just happened. And this is how it affects your next scenario. That's one form of progression, right? But then there's also your personal player or army progression from round to round. So again, you also are incentivized to complete your objective, because, hey, you're going to get some awesome freebie magic items. And again, we're still working out the system, and we're thinking about making cards that we can give to players that they can then just assign to their characters. So their army actually, and again, a very simple way, we're looking for a version of this. We have larger aspirations, not quite Crusade level, but for like the 2-day event. But we know for a 1-day RTT, it's got to be quick, it's got to be fast. We're only allowed to the local gaming store so many hours, so it has to be cool. You're at the end of the game, Did you complete your objective? Yes or no? Right? Did you do the kill points? Yes or no? Okay, so there's basically two piles of magic items. There's the good magic item pile and the better magic item pile. Relative to how well you did, you get to pull a new item from that pile and then give it to one of your characters for the rest of the day at the event, which is really exciting. So you actually get to progress twice before you get to the third game.
Yeah, and I just, one idea that comes to mind is that eventually there could be things in here, like you're actually battling over a specific item that's on that map, and the winner will be able to
Could
take that
be.
item home. There could be a narrative value to certain items. Like, for example, you could be fighting over the 9 books of Nagash. And so the good guys are trying to stop the villains from resurrecting Nagash, where they have to get these 9 books back. So there could be specific items, and it could be each of the books of Nagash. And so these are just examples of ideas we could do in the future. Right now, it's going to be
Yeah.
common magic items. And so you'll be drawing from a specific pile. So before you play the game, you'll know that you're fighting over a weapon or an armor or a talisman. And so you could even be trying to gun for a specific one. Like maybe you really want to get an ogre blade on your duke. So you want to try to go fight the magic weapons. You want to try to win.
So you might know.
Yeah, good pop.
Or we might say this specifically, the scenario round one. Here are the scenarios in front of us. We didn't get into it too much, but effectively similar to a teams event, you pair your team. Here are all the good guys versus bad guys at the tables.
Yeah.
All right, who's attacking, who's defending? Right, it's not just random. Just spin the wheel. You're choosing which army is going to go against which army, and your choice could be my army is going to be good versus that army, or I really play the scenario. I think I'm good at that objective, or there's an ogre blade on this table, and if somebody completes this alternate objective on this table, they get the ogre blade the rest of the day. I want that ogre, right? So there's a lot of just fun, different reasons to craft the story around the scenario you're going to play. It's not just an RNG generator, which is really exciting.
So in my mind, so there's magic items, which is most of the missions. There's also battle honors. So this is where you can earn a special rule for a specific unit or character. It's not always characters that earn these. For example, you could earn a magic banner for certain units.
Could be cool.
And then battle honors is essentially something that would be themed for the given mission, and you'd be able to earn an honor, which is usually a single special rule, like hatred against wizards or having immune to psychology. And you get this rule for a specific unit in your army, and then you would get to carry that with you going forwards. Just like in Crusade, I had this idea that you could actually lose the progressive rewards over time, not mostly at the individual event, but by the time you get to the next event, you don't want to have too many kind of caked on. I do have rules in here where you can't transfer the item or the rule to anybody else, and so if you want to take a new one, you can only have one at a time, so you have to discard the old one. So there are a lot of limitations here. You can't get too out of control. But one thing that's really exciting about this, in my mind, is there might be special characters out there who are not very durable, or who don't have a very good magic weapon. And if you play that special character, you could actually earn an item and give the special character the item, and perhaps shore up a weakness that they inherently have that a build your own kind of character wouldn't have. And so that's something that can happen through the system.
Yep, it's fun ideas. Excited as we flesh that out further.
Yeah.
All right, so this one's been a difficult one, right? Trophies and prizes, because again, we know out of the gate, hey, we already said it's half the room versus the other half of the room. So that's one challenge to begin with. The other challenge is, let's say, again, if we're running a 2-day event, there's more entry fee prize money to play with to buy more prizes. But with a 1-day RTT, in particular, if you're running at a local gaming store, they're pretty set in their ways of, hey, they expect to give out, a first, second, third, or effectively 3 prizes. And most gaming stores do store credit. Now, they're all different, right? So depending on your local community or where you're playing, they're going to have different rules. And even in SoCal, we have different stores that do things differently. But we needed to figure out a way to work not just for the 2-day event, but what could we do for a 1-day event? And that led to some interesting conversations.
Yeah, also the other thing is to focus not just on how many skulls did you smash, but whether you're a good person, a good player, and a good painter kind of overall. And so it doesn't say that here yet, but basically for the Pirate King and the Best Teammate Awards, these are essentially the individual player who got the highest combination of sportsmanship votes, painting score, and the points they got in their games. And they should be weighted roughly equally. And so you could be coming to these events where, hey, maybe you've never won anything before, but if it's kind of all, overall averaged, you could be doing really well. And we want to incentivize that. We want to incentivize having a combination of, good gentlemanship, being a gentleman, and having a nice army to look at when you're playing it on the table. This would be the same thing.
Theme will play into that as well.
Yeah,
so we're still trying to, we have details to iron out here, right?
Yep. So there would be the 2 different teams would have the Best Teammate Award. The Pirate King is the best from the third party, and I do like that award because it helps incentivize people to help play those kind of more neutral armies that may help provide even more flavor to the story and help fill in
Mm-hmm.
the pairing gaps as well.
Yep.
And also, everyone on the winning team should earn some kind of award. Now, we can't have like 10 different prizes of store credit, but we could do something
Just
for
won't
sure.
work.
Now, one of the
Yeah.
ideas we came up with was the idea that you might have some kind of a certificate that said, hey, your army contributed this battle, and it might tell you the narrative story that, hey, if the good guys won this event, then here's your certificate that tells you what progress has been made and how the world has been changed. And we're going to go forward with it from there, and then, or vice versa. Right. And so that's something that maybe the winning team could take home and keep track of over time. In addition to those progressive awards that you bought or you got for your units, the intention is to have cards printed out that you can use during the game and then bring home. Right.
Yep. Yeah. I think kind of the trick, I still have a lot of stuff to figure out is the TO. It's kind of like, it's almost like a Super Bowl thing where you have to print out hats and shirts for both teams because you don't know who's going to win. So still trying to figure out exactly what's the best way, but we want to make sure everybody goes home with something cool, something memorable for that 1 day event or that 2 day event. Something that, they can put on their shelf or on their wall and have an awesome memory every time they see it. Oh, I remember I went to super fun, and they think about the stories and the battles that they had. So that is the goal.
Right. So then I'm still working on this. It's a scorecard so that during each event, each mission, you can write down which of the battles you are playing. So that's the specific table that will have a certain set of terrain, certain objectives on it. And then which round it was you're playing, your name and your opponent's name, the factions you were bringing, the alignment or basically the team you were on. And then you can write in here basically how many campaign points you got. Did you get your +2? Did they get their +1? All those things are going here. And I would love it if people were able to write then that they had some kind of events that happened during the battle. And I know we're going to have not have a lot of time, but people can write down that, oh, they got a Monster Slayer hit against the Arachnorok Spider, and then it timbered, and then it crushed you with its massive weight. That would be hilarious. I would love to have that written down somewhere so that we can incorporate that as things go on. And then people can submit these little quick little short cuts instead of having like a BCP app or something that you're typing into, which by the way actually takes me way longer most of the time because the app doesn't work very well on my phone and I'm constantly just trying to figure out how to zoom in.
It's just you specifically. But yeah, to your earlier point though, this is not, we very much do not want this to live in the BCP app in the sense that we don't want the scores or what's happening to affect, because there are a lot of people out there who care genuinely for both the rankings, the people that are pulling up, collaborating all the numbers together for world or for their own personal rankings. So we just want to make sure this is just a fun narrative event. The score is only relative to this event. We don't want to muddy the waters with something else. So this is why we do need to, we don't have our own app, that we do need to figure out a separate, what's the easiest version to track the results after these games that won't drive me insane. I do remember back in the day before BCP and some of the modern apps, having to have the Excel sheet, the infamous Excel sheet up and such. So we might need to bring some of those back in order to make this effective for what we're doing. So definitely work in progress there.
Yeah, so here's like an example how you might fill it out. You might say that, one player got 1 point, like I put Mike here as having 1 point on the objective score, getting 1 for 500, 1 for 1,000. The other player might have gotten 2 on objective score and gotten 1 for the 1,000. And then the overall event ended up with 3 points for each team in total for that specific battle. And then we'll look at the sum total of all the battles to figure out where we're at with the overall teams and the rivalry. There's some key moments I put in here as like an example. And these are just things that, potentially players could write in there to give us just an overall idea of what happened during the game, so we can have an overall developing story. If perhaps there was a good duel between two generals in the banner at the table, and it was a very close and hard fought fight, maybe there's some kind of a thing that moves on as we move on from there.
All right, what's next, sir?
So we're gonna stop this one here because this is the overall idea of the World War Legends Legacy narrative events and what they look like. Then we would need to go into my next crazy document that's also 10 pages long. That's all of the different individual scenarios for the war in the Westerlands, which is kind of what that looks like, what mercenary forces would be available. And that'll be in a next upcoming video. So stay tuned for that, everyone who's interested. And, hey, if you like these ideas and you want to work with them, there's, of course, tons of room to improvise. Treat this almost like an early draft for the match play guide of narrative, the narrative play guide, right? And that's
narrative play guide.
Yeah, Games Workshop might be coming out with eventually, but for now, we want to work on something like this and go run with it.
Yep, and again, we're already working on this for our community, but as always, everything that we've ever created is public. You can find it on our website, you can find it on our Discord, under the downloads, from our terrain layouts to our FAQ to our errata. Our objective is to grow the community, to help and share everybody out there, to make sure Old World is a thriving and successful game system, because we love it so much. And if you're watching this episode and got this far, we know you love it too. All right, Evan, any last closing words, sir?
So everyone out there needs to stay legendary and hopefully give us some good comments and good feedback and join the Discord. So you find the link in the description.
All right, we'll see you next time.